Well, I think one thing that we need to do is put politics aside, and that's exactly why Democrats have agreed with President Trump on his goals of paid sick leave and his goals of free coronavirus testing. And so all of those things have been included in our package. We bump it up a little bit more, but, you know, when you have a Democratic House and a Republican Senate, compromise is the name of the game. I think the president's going to have to accept the fact that we're fighting for people who are going to be potentially unemployed. He's going to have to accept the fact that we're going to push on doctor and nurse protection. But also, when you look at the best healthcare system in the world, that's something that's up for debate. South Korea has up to 10,000 tests per day. They've been able to provide tests to any single person that wants it, and here people are scrambling. And it almost seems like the more wealthy and powerful you are, the more able you are to access a test. But the more the rougher a road you've got here, it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to access healthcare. That's exactly the recipe for disaster in a pandemic.
Now, AOC, I always try to do this, and I think I do a pretty good job, certainly better than a lot of other people that think that they work in the media. When something is good or when something is brave or when something is right, I say it. AOC went on Bret Baier's show. Now, Bret Baier is very fair. He's not an opinion guy. I don't think AOC would sit down with, like, Tucker, because which, by the way, would be amazing. But sitting down with Bret Baier, let's give some credit. She's able to go and sit down and do that. When I say able, she's willing to do that. A lot of Democrats, a lot of libs never do that. Won't do it. Won't subject themselves to anybody that doesn't just give them softball after softball and tell them how wonderful they are, which I think is really, it is hurting. It's part of the polarization in this country. It is hurting discourse. I mean, some of you have been asking me, especially given the last time I went on, Bill Maher's show. Yeah, they were disrespectful and unfair and didn't let me talk. But I'm there. I'm making my points. They act that way. People at least get to see. I'll argue. I'll argue the other side. I'll argue my side on anything with anyone, anytime, anywhere. No such thing as like, oh, I can't, unless I'm not going to sit down with members of the Nation of Islam or neo-Nazis or whatever, right? I'm not going to do that. But I'm saying anybody. There's no forum I won't go into for fear of having to deal with the other side. In fact, quite the opposite. I'd go on CNN tonight. I would go on Anderson Cooper show and talk about the Trump administration's response to this, no problem. They just won't have me because they're afraid that their anchors will get schooled, and they will. So there's a huge difference, by the way, between one-on-one versus multi-person. When it's multi-person, it's just, think of it almost like a fight. I don't care how good you think you are as a fighter. If there are four people, and of course some of you, I'm going to get, producer Mark, there's so many jiu-jitsu experts in this audience. Whenever I bring this stuff up, they're like, Buck, I'm a 9th degree black belt, and I studied in Kyoto with sensei, blah, 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 and I could do and I'm always just like, okay, that's good for you, but for the rest of us, if 3 or 4 people attack you, I don't care if you're like a strong, tough person, you're going to have your hands full. If 3 able-bodied males attack you as a guy, whereas, one-on-one, you might think you've got a pretty good shot against a lot of people. Same thing when you're debating. If you're arguing with 4 people, because you can't, they're going to have a lot more time to speak than you. There's no equal time. You have something to add to this conversation?
I don't. You called me over, so I came over.
Oh yeah, no. You see in our inbox. I mean, there are people that.
Oh yeah, somebody an expert on everything.
We had a guy, and by the way, I'm not saying this in anything other than respect. We had a guy when I talked about the FFL license. I'm like, one of you is going to write, and we got a whole paragraph about how much an FFL license costs and how you get one. I think there are a few of them actually.
We have a lot of toilet paper experts these days.
Well, let's be honest though. We're all kind of toilet paper experts, are we?
No human doesn't use it, and if you do, actually, I want to hear from you. If you don't use toilet paper, I want to hear from you. If
someone's figured out a better way, then I'd be somewhat curious to see how that goes. So. Anyway, so AOC, I'm just saying, I respect people I can't say I respect AOC's positions or knowledge about anything, but I respect that she has the gall. And I will say, even Bill Maher, when I did his show afterwards, he said, I'm the Sugar Ray Leonard of conservatives. And, he doesn't give respect on air to people that he should necessarily from the right, but he does understand that there are a lot of people that just won't even try, won't even show up. Or even worse, they show up and they're like, yeah, you're right. Donald Trump's kind of terrible, actually. And yeah, I know. I want you guys to nod your heads and like me. I don't care. Don't like me. That's fine. Lib audience. Doesn't matter. So I'd rather be right than be loved. Maybe that should be, I kind of like that, actually. What do you think? I think we'd use that. So where was I? Oh, yes, AOC. So there are two worthwhile parts of what she says here. The first has to do with wealthy people getting tests. Now, I have a friend right now who is receiving, and he's been very vocal about it. I won't name him because I've also been talking to him offline about it. But I have a friend in conservative media who's waiting for his, see, I almost did it, Wuhan virus. And I need to get into why it's important we call it that. Waiting for his Wuhan virus test. Today, I think he's supposed to get, it might be tomorrow, get back results. And he has been one of these people who's saying that it has been a nightmare to get the test. Like trying to actually get the test, they make it, you're on the line with the CDC, with your healthcare provider. Nobody can figure this thing out. Folks, friends, this actually isn't really that complicated. This should be very doable. This is a failing. But before we get into why it's a failing, you have now some very prominent people who have been either confirmed to be in contact with Wuhan virus or are officially confirmed to have Wuhan virus. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is on Brett Baer's show, and right around at that point in time, I think it came out that that was 6 p.m. last night, so I was on WR show. I think that's when we saw that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had self-quarantined, and his wife was showing symptoms. Turns out the Prime Minister of Canada's wife has coronavirus. I don't know enough about sports. Producer Mark, do you remember the NBA player who has been confirmed with it on the Jazz, right?
Rudy Gobert.
Rudy Gobert. He has it, right? He has corona.
Yes,
virus.
And also Donovan Mitchell, who's from Queens, is on the same team as the Jazz.
NBA player. Oh,
NBA
he's got
player,
it.
So 2 players, and he's a star.
Yeah. So we're all stars, though, Producer Mark. We're all unique snowflakes made in God's image.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
We're all special.
We're all special. So that's and of course Tom Hanks and his wife. People are now thinking, okay, hold on a second. And I believe Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, the pro-Trump populist president of Brazil, he has been tested. He is negative. But somebody in his retinue, one of his people communications directors, I think, either him or his wife has it. I think they believe. It's tough to even keep up with this. But you were seeing, and then, oh my gosh, the libs, they all want to know why President Trump has not been tested for this. And they think that it was casual enough contact between the president and anybody who might have this that it's not necessary. Prominent people are getting this, which is, I mean, it's bad that anyone gets this, but it is at least raising awareness that anyone can pick this up, that this is just like anyone can pick up a cold, right? Doesn't matter who you are. Prominent people can get this. And why is it, though, that they're able to get a test so quickly? AOC brings that up. I will say that maybe that's just a perception. Maybe those prominent people are just able to maneuver the system more effectively because I don't know. But I do know that my friend who's been waiting, he's been waiting for over a week to even find out what's going on with his test. And I think it took him a week to get the test. And, that's unacceptable. So the testing issue is real. Look, if we had a test sent to the home of every American in the country, let's understand that would be helpful. I'm not going to pretend like that's not helpful to know who has it right now. But it wouldn't mean that we wouldn't have to worry about this. Right? It wouldn't mean that we still wouldn't have a surge coming up possibly of confirmed cases, and there's still community spread. And, so even if you knew who had it, you'd have to know who had it and then know everyone that they came in. They call it contact tracing. And you have to do a contact trace of anybody that had come into contact with that person. Because I also don't know if they're able to pick the virus up before you're symptomatic. I don't know the sensitivity of the test. I mean, there's a lot that goes into this. And there are a lot of still unanswered questions. And there was one report today. I think the mayor of Miami, the Miami of mayors. Well, that would probably be really interesting. But does the mayor of Miami have it, or is Producer Mark? Would you check for me on that one? I think I don't want to ever say that the public figure has coronavirus and doesn't, but I thought I saw that. There's so many headlines coming out on this. Yes, he does, right? Yeah, the mayor of Miami does have it, so that has coronavirus. So people are getting this. All right. So we know that there is this problem with the testing. And let's understand this right now. There are going to be discussions about this. This is what the left has focused on. And see how long I've gone without really making this political. I'm going to try to do that as much as possible, because this is one of the people always say, oh, this is not political, when they mean it's very political. It's as political as it gets. Oh, I'm just talking about, access to women's reproductive health. This shouldn't be political. Oh, please. It's very political. This is actually above that. This issue of protecting our vulnerable population. We keep talking about vulnerable seniors. It's not just seniors who are in the vulnerable population. And, as I've said, the one thing, whenever you talk about vulnerable seniors, everybody's got a mom, a dad, a grandma, grandpa, great-grandma, great-grandpa, great-uncle, so even if you're not in that population age-wise, there are people, the nearest and dearest people to your heart are. And so that's why everyone focuses in on this and understands this is like, we go to war with this virus so they don't touch, grandma or grandpa or anybody else, right? That's what we're trying to accomplish here. But it's not even just that age cohort that really has to be on guard. When they talk about comorbidities, this is where everyone starts to think about how, your health is so important and you must do everything you can. It is on each and every one of us. Now, I know people I have celiac disease, not because I'm a bad guy, right? I mean, people have things that come up. It's not because I made bad choices. It just is. But to the degree, I don't eat gluten. That's what I mean. You make the choices you can, because if you don't, you're just going to play a worse hand. We've all been dealt a hand with our health, but you got to play the best hand you can. There was a very interesting, I'm trying to find it right now. I'm sorry. There's so much information coming in, team. So if today sounds a little bit less, a little more freeform of a show and a little bit less like I've got this precise, usually I come in here and I've got 3 hours of topics broken down, issue by issue, content by content. What's the takeaway? I mean, that's how I approach the show. Today, I just feel like we're all drinking from a fire hose. So it's a little more of a, as we go. Okay. This was on respiratory fitness. I thought this was fascinating. And for America, you have to put this in the overall plus column in terms of our ability to withstand the spread of this disease. This is from Carl Quintanilla, who is a reporter anchor at CNBC. And he says the two most important parameters in respiratory fitness. This really matters, right? Because this disease goes for the lungs. That is the way that this is taking people, taking them out where they have to go to the hospital, and then even some people don't make it through, don't win the fight in the hospital, even if they have intubation, if they're in the ICU. So respiratory fitness is really, really important. And he says the two most important factors in that are, one of these is an individual. And look, I have a lot of sympathy for people that have any kind of an addiction. I get it. But I'm just looking at the numbers here, looking at the aggregate of what we're facing, whether the person smokes cigarettes. It's very, very important when you're gauging their respiratory fitness. So I'm telling you this because I know there's a lot of Team Buck that you smoke, and I'm just looking out for you. You have to consider yourself, if you're a smoker, in a higher risk, even if you're a 35-year-old or a 30-year-old smoker. You got to consider yourself to be in a higher risk category in this. So please take those precautions that people are talking about. I know it's like a little counterintuitive, but if you're a long-time smoker, I mean, not if you smoke one cigarette a month or something, but if you're a long-time smoker and you're in your 30s and your 40s and your 50s, you got to think about this like this disease is going to come after you very, very possibly like somebody who's in their 70s or their 80s in terms of your ability for your lungs to fight back against this. So you got to be very careful. And the pollution level is the other part of this. That's also a really important indicator for how well. Remember, I was in China, as I said, a year ago, and I was leaving Shanghai, which usually is not as badly polluted as Beijing. And it is like something out of a post-apocalyptic movie and it was still there. And it's apparently a lot better than it used to be. But you can see this, I can't even really explain it to you. I mean, it just looks like a collection of smog. And when the sun's going down, it kind of bounces off it in a not appealing way. And, you have this this goo that's all in the air. It's just pollution. And by the way, I'm all about conservation. I'm against pollution. I'm just not against CO2, which plants rely on for air. And, that's CO2 is not a pollutant, but we all have to pretend because the green movement is insane. Pollution is bad. And I'm all like, no, we do not want these, industrial facilities spewing out acrid smoke that hurts your lungs. And, we breathe out CO2. So how much of a pollutant is it really, folks? Let's think about that for a second. It's literally coming out of your body every second. And we're supposed to think that's pollution anyway. Don't get me started on that. These days, I'll tell you, there's a part of me, I don't know, I'm a little rebel. You know what I'm not doing these days? As we're all like in lockdown and trying to stay alive and worried about our loved ones? No, they can come after me for the not recycling. Sorry, not doing it. It's going right in the trash. I'm sorry. I don't want to hear about it. More important things. Recycle. All right, so on smoking and on pollution, the smoking rate and the average pollution levels. Here's what you got country by country. China, smoking rate, 47%. Average pollution level, 41%. South Korea, smoking rate, 49%. Average pollution level, 24%. Iran, smoking rate, 21%. Average pollution level, 24%. Italy, 28 smoking rate, pollution 14. United States, smoking 19, pollution 9. This matters. We have a lower percentage of smokers, and this is probably the most important in terms of looking at the aggregate numbers and how this will affect the population of this country overall. We have much cleaner air than these other countries. Now, I know this seems like, how can this really matter? This is what it all comes down to is, can your lungs get enough oxygen to the rest of your body if and when this thing attacks you? And your lungs, if you are dealing with daily pollution all the time, your lung capacity is affected and the strain on your lungs is already higher. So this is not like, oh, we're great. It's America. We got clean air, so we're not. No, of course, this has still killed people in this country. I think it just killed the first person in New Jersey. It's killed a bunch of seniors out in Washington State, but we're in better shape than a lot of these countries we've already seen from day one because of the health of our population and because of the age of our population. Italy's population is much older than ours, as a percentage, and then also pollution. So I also wanted to get into the testing situation here because we're told a lot about the failure in the testing. There's some lessons here about the CDC and about bureaucracy, and then also about ingenuity. And there's a big focus now that I want to drill down to a little bit about local government, local action, and how if you're relying on the feds, you are going to be waiting a very long time. Local governments are stepping up now in a way that we should focus on. Just to give you a little bit of a breather, a little bit of a pause in all the Wuhan, and I haven't even gotten into the reason why we should call it that. And I keep meaning to, and team, there's so much. And look, we're going to be in this together. We're in this every day until this thing is passed. So shields high for real. This was a story that I thought was just worth taking a moment to look at. Andrew Gillum. You may remember Andrew Gillum. He was a very celebrated by the media gubernatorial candidate for the state of Florida, very important state, as we all know, for a lot of reasons. And he was the mayor of Tallahassee, which, as I understand it, is not a particularly well-run city. It's got a city with some problems. But it turned, and I think now he's a CNN contributor, or he was, because, CNN, if you become a famous Democrat running for office, the first thing you move when you lose is you just go to Jeff Zucker and he starts writing you checks. Turns out that this is breaking news from today. Andrew Gillum was, quote, in an inebriated state on the scene of a possible drug overdose at the Mondrian South Beach Hotel early this morning, with clear plastic baggies containing suspected crystal meth. Not only was he the Democrats, and he came close to winning, the Democrats' favorite. I mean, the media loved this guy. He was their choice for the governor of California. I'm sorry, pardon me, governor of Florida. But he also was talked about by some people as a possible VP candidate. And look, if this was like 15 years ago and he was a young guy and this happened and we found this out later, I'd be like, hey, I mean, look, I know drugs are bad. ODing is very serious. I get all that. But, I think we're living in a time now where we are more forgiving of people's youthful indiscretions than we used to be, unless it's Kavanaugh. And then we make up indiscretions that didn't happen and we make up assaults that didn't happen. But, in general, I think we're a little bit, but not if you're being actively talked about as a possible VP candidate. Then you probably shouldn't be in an inebriated state at a drug overdose scene at the Mondrian in South Beach, a hotel I've been to, by the way, which, let me tell you, party never stops there. That place is lit AF for sure. That's where the party happens. I'll just tell you, it's a lot of unts at the Mondrian and at what's that other, the SLS. Whew, man, you better put your party shoes on if you go to the SLS in South Beach. I can tell you that much. So Andrew Gillum, we'll see if this ends up being what it looks like, but yeah, that's a real thing that's going on right now. That's a news story for you that has nothing to do with Wuhan virus. Okay, so CDC and then Wuhan virus, and then we got to get into some other stuff. The CDC is a federal bureaucracy that is vast and bloated and wasteful and spends a lot of time not doing. We all think here's our perception, and it reminds me a little bit of the movie The Strain, which I'll come back to later because there's a lot of. If you haven't watched it, I think now is the time to watch that show. I'm just gonna say, if you haven't seen The Strain, it's kind of about a pandemic that's really also, instead of a disease, it's a essentially a vampire disease. Makes people into vampires. That's a disease. Look, if you're going to be self-quarantining or social distancing and you want something to watch, maybe it's the worst thing to watch because it might freak you out a little bit because the hero is a guy from the CDC. The main character is like the CDC director of, infectious disease. It's basically Dr. Fauci, but like a 40 years younger version of him, who somehow is also really good with like machetes and weapons, but of course. So, although I bet Fauci could throw down if he needed to in the zombie apocalypse. I don't know. I get the feeling, if you talk to him, he probably in the old country back in the day in the Bronx played a little stickball, and I bet he was in some scraps. So, I could just, hey, it's Tony Fauci from the Bronx. Okay, so is his name Anthony? Yeah, it's Anthony, right? The CDC was asked if they could allow labs to do their own tests, and they said no. Because they're not allowed to say yes because the bureaucracy has rules and the bureaucracy won't just bend rules. Now, that's probably where Trump should have put out an executive order for the CDC to be able to expedite any test requests, and not just test requests, but the ability to set up a test and do it remotely, because there are a lot of state labs that have the ability to do this. I will say Governor Cuomo, who I've given a hard time to many times, and I think rightly so in the past, Governor Cuomo seems like he's on this. I believe strongly that, the Democrats, and you're seeing this from the Democrat executive leadership roles a lot more than you're seeing. The legislators are all doing the Schumer. Trump is terrible. He can't handle it. We're all going to die because Trump. That's what Schumer's doing, which is disgusting. Same thing with, hey, Pelosi, if I was in charge, yeah. If you were in charge, you'd have to wake you up from a Chardonnay nap. But Newsom seems like he's on it. Cuomo seems like he's on it, and I'm thankful about that. I don't see them taking cheap shots. Maybe it will change at some point, but I think while we're in the midst of this pandemic, they're on our side, they're on our team, and they're making that pretty clear from their public actions. Cuomo set up a drive-through clinic just like South Korea has here in New York. Now they're prioritizing people from New Rochelle, which has been the hardest hit, and they're prioritizing anybody with symptoms over people that just think they may have been exposed. But we got a drive-through where you'll be able to go, sample, you're in your car, you don't have to deal with anybody, be exposed to anybody. That's the kind of stuff we need. We need ingenuity. We need people to be thinking outside the box to use the resources we have most effectively. And the CDC, I hate to say it, got in the way of that. CDC slowed down a lab in Washington State that wanted to start doing testing. Not good. The CDC slowed down, the processing of this stuff. I mean, there's been a lot of bureaucratic red tape at a time when, man, we should be taking a chainsaw to red tape. And if there's ever a time where you could expect that government would finally wake up and be like, okay, we just got to do what we need to do here. I'm hoping that we have a vaccine in a year. And I mean, I think that Trump is a guy who understands incentives. We should say, whoever gets a vaccine, I mean, would anybody, I'm just going to put this out there. I don't even know how the mechanism for this. People have talked about bounties for curing diseases before, but would anybody object to, whatever, you get to sell your vaccine and the government's going to reimburse you for that fine. We should put a $3 or $4 or $5 billion bounty on top of whoever cures this thing. Whoever gets the cure in gets it done the fastest. I don't see why think about how much money that would save the government. I mean, so it shouldn't, the market is working here, but there's all these regulations and everything else. Maybe a little bit of extra incentive. I would be all for it. Because remember, this is like a foreign invasion. This is not standard market stuff. This goes beyond that, right? It's kind of like if you see a marketplace that's operating and, you want to have rules and contracts and people in free exchange and they can buy or not buy and do all these things. If somebody shows up with a flamethrower to light the whole market on fire, that's when the government has to step in, right? That's when you actually want something other than just like the free exchange of goods and services. And this virus is like that flamethrower. I mean, this virus is trying to just burn it all down. So we do need, now there's a role for government, there's a role for every individual, and there's a role for everything in between. And as I've been saying, you are responsible for your health. This is one thing that I've had to learn because I've had many frustrating experiences with the medical community, and some doctors who listen to the show have told me, that they think that that's not representative or whatever, and that's fine. I just can only speak from my own experience. I find that modern medicine can be great. It can also be really, really disappointing because of the system we have, because of the incentive structure, because of healthcare, the way it is, and the bureaucratization of things when we really need people who are allowed to heal and focus and work with people. So that's good to see in New York. We have the localization of approaches, and this is where the federalist system, we have the genius of that federalist system. The federal government's doing its thing, has to put some funding in place, maybe some broad rules of the road. But every community should be coming up with what they do here. And we're also going to be learning some communities will do things that work, some won't. And those communities will unfortunately pay a price based on those decisions. But that also allows other communities to say, whoa, okay, so this place did this and that worked out pretty well. This other place didn't. And this is where everyone starts looking at the flu pandemic of 1918, Spanish flu, where I believe at the time Philadelphia and St. Louis were the third and fourth largest cities in the country, respectively. I didn't realize St. Louis was ever that big comparatively, but I guess this is what I've read, so I'm assuming it's true. And Philadelphia makes sense to me, but you didn't have the explosion of population on the West Coast cities like California and San Francisco and Los Angeles until into the in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. So Philadelphia did not take the kind of quarantine shutdown measures that we've seen, and St. Louis did, and St. Louis had a much better outcome from that flu than Philadelphia, right? So you see that different cities make different decisions, and that will affect them. So the local has become very important. And now we've got to get to Wuhan virus and why we call it that.
The World Health Organization now has officially declared COVID-19 a pandemic. Downplaying it, being overly dismissive, or spreading misinformation is only going to hurt us and further advantage the spread of the disease. But neither should we panic or fall back on xenophobia. Labeling COVID-19 a foreign virus does not displace accountability for the misjudgments that have been taken thus far by the Trump administration. Let me be crystal clear. The coronavirus does not have a political affiliation. It will infect Republicans, independents, and Democrats alike. It will not discriminate based on national origin, race, gender, or zip code. It will touch people in positions of power as well as the most vulnerable in our society. And it will not stop. Banning all travel from Europe or any other part of the world may slow it, but as we've seen, it will not stop it. And travel restrictions based on favoritism and politics rather than risk will be counterproductive.
Joe Biden is not a strategic mind. Yeah, and so I'm trying to avoid that he's a blundering buffoon and a moron who is corrupt and all that stuff today. There'll be other days where I say that more openly because I think that that's all true. But Joe Biden is not somebody that I think we should listen to on this at all. And also, there's a lot that he says there. He's trying to do the travel restrictions. He's basically saying this isn't political, and then he tries to take all these political shots at the administration, as though we're not clever enough to figure that out. But when he says that coronavirus, see, I just did it, COVID-19, as he calls it, has no nationality, or we shouldn't fall victim to xenophobia, that is Chinese propaganda right now from the Chinese government. In fact, the Chinese government has already produced a book that they're distributing, and I believe they've already translated it in different languages. Fox News has a story about this, that America is responsible for this, and maybe America even did this on purpose. They're telling the Chinese people this. Now, a lot of the more sophisticated Chinese news consumers are going to be like, come on, this is more the Communist Party. But a lot of them won't. A lot of them will think that maybe they've been through this horrible scenario because of nefarious American activity. My friends, Trump is the first president to realize what we're really dealing with when it comes to China and the confrontation that looms on the horizon here of two superpowers. It's us and them, and they want to be number one. They want to be the hegemon. That's very clear from everybody who's paying attention to what's going on in that country. And I even said when I was there and talking to people who are in the business community in China, there's been a shift from the Chinese culturally, politically, and from a just a news consumer perspective, thinking America's great, American markets are awesome, American, Coca-Cola is delicious, and McDonald's is wonderful, and all that kind of stuff that all the globalization, ooh, look at this, to, no, we're better than America. They're kind of lazy, they're kind of slow, and we're going to defeat them, and we're rivals, and in fact, we're better than they are. There's been a shift in their thinking, and the Chinese Communist Party knows this. And they're also going to have to deal with a lot of economic displacement in their own country. A lot of people are upset. And totalitarian regimes know that the narrative that even if they have to force it down people's throats, the narrative of regime self-preservation is very important. And we are going to see that continue to be an issue here. We're going to see them try to convince their own population and as much as the rest of the world as they can that this is an American problem. No, this came from China. China lied about it. Because China lied about it, there was much more global spread. People in Italy got this. There's a large influx of tourists from China to Italy. Italy is one of the great tourist destinations, of course, for the whole world. But, the Chinese government's lack of transparency on this issue had real consequences for other countries. And they're now trying to displace that into us. And that's unacceptable. This is the Wuhan virus. It comes from Wuhan City, China. That is what happened. And whether it escaped from a virology lab, which is I wouldn't say it's a conspiracy, it's a theory. It's happened before. So people say, oh, that would never happen. Well, they've lost other viruses that have gotten into the general population. They just didn't happen to be as bad as this one. But it probably came from the animal trade there. As I said, I think they call it zoonotic transmission between different species. And, maybe China needs to not allow people to eat like rare and endangered and bizarre animals as a regular practice. We do have laws here that, you can't keep livestock within city limits. There are reasons for that because we don't want people, living next to pig pens and goat farms and all these things in very, very close quarters for reasons like this. And if you look at the way Chinese animal husbandry takes place, or with livestock, the way that the proximity to livestock and the sanitary conditions, Chinese have a huge livestock industry, and particularly pigs. That's why they were very upset about the swine flu epidemic the last time around, because it really affected their pork industry, and that is something that China doesn't want to have to deal with or be held to account for. But, Chinese practices when it comes to the sanitary conditions of their livestock industry, Chinese pollution, these are issues that affect the whole world. And China is not a good neighbor on this stuff at all. It's the opposite. And that's really where you're going to see this conflict, this continued friction play out in public. And that's why we call it the Wuhan virus, because that is what it is. It is a virus from Wuhan. We are now, producer Mark and I are thinking about how we get home safe from the center of New York City, and what's going to happen to our loved ones, and what's going to happen to our city, and what's going to happen to our country and to our fellow Americans. because of what happened in China and the way the Chinese government did not respond openly and with an eye toward humanitarianism and people first. We are sitting here in New York City, and because of what happened in Wuhan City, China, and the way the authorities reacted to what happened there, that's affecting all of our lives. It's affecting the lives of every single one of you who's listening to this. I know you're all making the same decisions. You all have the same concerns. And, we're standing here just waiting to see, are we faced with an onslaught, or are we going to be able to turn back the tide? And this is, we'll have to see. I think next week is going to be tough.